Hi, this is Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here today with allfreeknitting.com to talk to you about creating a modeled yarn color by space dyeing yarn in a single pot. So in this pot I have 2 cups of water and 2 tablespoons of distilled white vinegar, and I have turned the heat on to low, and we are going to be using this as the dye bath for our yarn. But first we're soaking the yarn, rather than pre-soaking the yarn in water where the yarn's determined to float, but we're trying to get it to sink and to pre-soak in the dye bath itself, because when we actually add the food coloring, we want to have as little movement in the water as possible. So that way we do not get a perfect uniform color, but instead we get a kettle dyed effect where we get some beautiful variation in the shades of the color that we're dealing with. Okay, so I mean, you want to have your yarn completely submerged in the water. It takes a tiny bit of effort just because there's air in the yarn. And so the components that you need to dye yarn are yarn. This is 100% wool fingering weight yarn. Heat, which we are getting from our stove. You need acid from the form of vinegar. Then you need your colored source. And we're going to be using some liquid food coloring today when we dye this yarn. Okay, so I am going to let the stove come to just a brief simmer, and then make sure that the yarn is completely submerged, and then we'll be back to add our dye. Okay, you can see that the yarn, or the dye bath is now at a boil. So I'm going to turn off the stove and let the bubbles subside, because we want the heat, but we don't want to have a lot of movement in the water. I'm just moving the skein back a bit so that way we can try. We want to get a somewhat even pattern over the repeats, but you know, that's not absolutely essential by any means. So now I've got my blue food coloring eyedropper, and I am going to start dropping blue in random places around the dye bath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you can see that, you know, there are these dots and spots, but then the dye is starting to kind of come out, and we'll go around a bit. And I think, well, I like, after adding the initial dye, I like to wait a bit and see how it spreads to then get a sense if I want to add more. Because since we want there to be a nice mottled color, we don't want to add too much dye because we don't want the yarn to become saturated. But one thing that can be done later on is, if there's too much white space and you would rather there be a little less white, is that then we could actually uniformly add a tiny bit of blue to then make all the light colors of blue be not quite so bright, or even over dye the yarn with another color. But I think that we're going to get some nice modeling, because we see that there is some dye that's leaching out, and we want to let this cool for a long time because we're not adding any heat as we continue here. All of the heat has already been supplied, and so the longer that we let the yarn sit in here with the heat, the more of the dye will absorb to the yarn. So I will be back when the color, like in the center, has cleared and all the dye has absorbed to the yarn. So we're not quite ready to stop letting this dye, but I just kind of wanted to point out that the blue has gone all over. So there will be some pale blue spots, but there will be very few white spots that are left. So this makes me happy. This is partially because blue absorbs slower than, say, pink and red. And so this is the reason why you wait before adding more color, to see how far the color will diffuse. Okay, so the water is now cold, so there's no chance of any more of that color absorbing. But if we wanted more blue color, we could turn up the heat, since the color in there is now uniform, and cook it some more. But instead, we're going to go and start washing the yarn. And so I've got here a bath of lukewarm water, and I'm going to put in just a little bit of dish soap to rinse the yarn until the color starts to run, until the rinse water runs clear. But what I'm going to show you is that we have this beautiful skein of yarn that has this mottled blue color. And after I'm done rinsing it, I guess I'll come back and show it to you once more so you can see more clearly what the coloration is like. Okay, and so here is our mottled blue yarn where we have regions of dark color and regions of light color. And it's very subtle, but unlike some of the yarn that we get in the other tutorials where it's a more uniform color, this is a way that in a single batch you can make a nice kettled dyed appearance because you have all these different tones of blue. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and this video was brought to you by All Free Knitting.